would be like, Brian hates it when I use this example, but it's actually, it fits. It would be as if I was going out for the evening and I said to our daughters, who are 13 and 9, listen to your father, because otherwise he's going to beat you up so bad you won't be able to walk. Now,
you can see why I don't like that particular example, yes.
I mean, this isn't actually the most pleasant thing for me to say. You know, you might want to say, you know, listen to your dad, because maybe he'll watch a movie and make you some popcorn later. You know, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you got to be scared of this guy, so pay attention here. That's what Paul is saying to the Jews about Rome.
To the Christians.
Sorry, to the Christians in Rome, about Rome. So when you compare this passage to the other passages that praise Rome, it comes off like this damning with faint praise kind of a thing. And then he ends with this, you know, this is the same reason you pay taxes, because the authorities are busy with this very thing, with the sword. That's what taxes went to, by and large, supporting the military. Pay to all what is owed to them, verse 7. Kind of begs the question, what exactly is owed to Rome? Taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due. My translation says respect, but the Greek word is actually that phobos word again. Fear to whom fear is due, and honor to whom honor is due. So there's a bit of a question over it. Are these things all owed to Rome? We know that the fear is. What about those other things? And then, verse 8, owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves one another has fulfilled the law. So he's got this thing, you know, you owe them what they're due, except really what you owe is only love. Which means the passage has this subversive twist right at the end. Because what do you really owe Rome? Your enemy, who bears the sword, who rules with wrath? What do you owe Rome? Love. That's what you owe the empire. That's blessing those who persecute you. That's overcoming evil with good. So it's this, I think, a letter of subversion against the empire. But what Paul is saying, that doesn't mean we fight the empire with the empire's own weapons. We don't go in there with violence to say, we're subverting you because you are awful. No, the way you subvert the violence of the empire is by being this alternative community where love and forgiveness and food for the enemy is practiced. And that the empire has no way of dealing with, because this isn't what the empire is expecting. The empire is expecting to put down violence. And instead you have communities doing this subversive thing called loving their enemy in the middle of it. So does that get at Romans 13 for you?
Let me just add in one last thing. So verse 8 says, owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Whose law? He makes it clear, the next verse. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word, love your neighbor as yourself. Whose law are you ultimately subject to? Rome's? No. The law that comes from those despised and shameful Jews. It's the Torah that he refers to here. It's the Decalogue. Right? That itself, I think, is a subversive move that he makes at the end of this discussion about how you relate to the empire. Over there.
Second World War, when men joined the army to fight Hitler. How does that fit into this?
Looking at the public address system.
It's on.
We're supposed to love Hitler? Or I'm a bit confused about that. How does that relate, say, to Christian the Armed Forces fighting against a tyrant like Hitler?
Yes. That's definitely your question, Sophia. No, there's very good reasons why it's her question.
This is my question, because as I said last night, my roots are Dutch. My parents were born in Holland during the Second World War. And my family stories, as I said last night, were the stories from my dad's side of the family about fighting the Germans. They were the stories of being involved in the underground. And my father is actually named after an uncle of his who was, all of his father's brothers were captured by the Nazis early on. Early on in the underground, they were a little naive. My grandfather spent time in a concentration camp, and the oldest of all those brothers was shot by the Nazis. And my father was named after him. And now there's a street in Holland named after him as well, so it's kind of interesting to go there and see my father's name on this street. And that's the story. The story is we are a family who fight injustice, and when it's there, we go in with, guns blazing, make sure this isn't going any further. 2 years ago, my grandmother, on my mom's side, turned 85. And I should say I've struggled with this text precisely because of that family history. And I have thought, well, maybe at that time that was a faithful response, but it wouldn't be for me. 2 years ago, my maternal grandmother wrote her memoirs, and I edited them for her. And and a big chunk of it was about the war, because that's when she was married. And I remember before thinking, why would people do that? Why would you get married during the war and start having your children during the war? And well, it's because there was no foreseeable end to the war, right? You wanted to have a life, and so you did these things. And she would write about what happened in her village, Haarlem, every time the underground bombed a bridge, every time the underground sabotaged a train. And whatever village was closest to those actions, the Germans would go into that village and shoot all the men. So the underground was engaging in these violent acts of subversion that escalated the violence. And she was saying, no, this can't be right. This is just making it worse for us. And even then I thought, well, that's not the army. And I kept reading, and then she told this incredible story of Nazi soldiers coming and doing yet another look for the men in the village. And my grandfather was a barber, so for a while he had escaped being sent to the camps because soldiers would come and get their hair cut. And after a while he started to hide because he had this feeling that someday they weren't going to get their hair cut and they were going to take him. And something had happened. There had been some violence, and they were rounding up all the men in the village, just door to door to door. My grandfather had run out the back of the house to a graveyard behind the house and was hiding in a freshly dug grave. The soldier came to the door. My grandmother let him in. She was sitting in the front room, and my mother, whose name was Irena, Peace, was lying in a cradle in the front room. And my great-grandmother was lying in a bed upstairs because she was so nervous she couldn't face this soldier. The soldier looked through the whole house. He searched for my grandfather, and he came down, and he walked over to the cradle, and he stood there for a long time looking in the cradle. And my grandmother's just sitting there, right? There's this German soldier looking at her child, her baby. And what she wrote in the book was, I just looked at this guy, and for the life of me, I couldn't see an enemy. And I read this, and I thought, how couldn't you see an enemy? This is the man who wants to take your husband. You are starving slowly because you have no food. You're living in a house where all the wood has been torn off the walls because you've used it as fuel so you can eat. And you can't see an enemy in this guy? And for me, it was just this completely different family story of embodying the values of the New Testament, that she would look at this man and not see an enemy. And I don't have a complete answer to your question in terms of what armies should do, but at least for me, looking at my family history, I saw an alternative that was an alternative of love over against that way of violence. And I thought it was an incredibly powerful story, more powerful than the stories I had been brought up on all those years.
But still live with the tension.
Yeah. But the tension
Still live
is,
that tension.
I am both those stories.